To Become a Witch, Prequel Short Story, Majestic Midlife Witch Series by NZ Nasser. All rights reserved. Ocean water frothed against the cliffs as my sisters and I hiked the steep trail towards the caves. Below us, boundless bay stretched for miles under dismal grey skies. Seagulls soared above us, their cries ringing in my ears. A frown coloured Kia's voice. You might have forgotten Mum's warnings, Sitara, but I remember them like they were yesterday. Avoid the Crips girls. Nothing good comes of the Crips girls. We should be on the beach with blankets and a bottle of Prosecco, not trekking into the unknown. What you need, big sis, is to go on another dig to scratch this exploring itch of yours. Tensing, I faced my two younger sisters. Kia, who knew what passion was but didn't always surrender to it, and Lena, who knew herself well because the youngest in a family has more space and urgency to find themselves. Lately, secrets had grown between us quicker than moss in the caves. I kind of blew it when I didn't turn up to the last dig. What? Kia took a sharp inhale, then composed herself. Harold will forgive you. He's the best boss you've ever had. I exhaled. There's no coming back from losing our biggest research grant in years. Lena winced and pushed a strand of golden hair out of her eyes. Oh, crap. There's got to be something you can do to get back into his good books. You two don't need to worry. I can still pay my fair share of the bills. What I meant was, we've got more important things to think about, life-changing things, secrets, inheritances, great loves that changed royal lines. But I didn't say it out loud. I opened my mouth like a fish on a hook, then clamped it shut again. When a gust of wind made my sundress flare, I flattened it and pushed on, scared that my sisters would refuse to follow, but incapable of resisting the magnetic pull that coaxed me further. A huff, and their footsteps scampered after mine, because after hearing my news, how could they abandon me? Sisters stuck together. Sisterly bonds were forged not by vows, but in the heat of childhood, summer days splashing in the tide, bickering over who had the biggest piece of chocolate, late night whispers long past our bedtime, and comfort through heartbreaks. Their solidarity made me feel both loved and grubby for manipulating them. As the elder sibling, it had fallen to me to be the parent when Mum and Dad died, but my sisters were now middle-aged women and I was done being the responsible one. The shift in my internal compass didn't feel selfish. It felt like freedom. After all, what if all the years of prioritizing safety had made us live smaller lives? With the onset of menopause, I finally understood that time is finite, and I couldn't carve myself into little pieces. The world was unbending. I had to adjust my own sails. I wanted to be the wise, unshackled woman who led her sisters to fulfill their potential. Kia muttered behind me. I can only spare an hour or two. I've got a set of jugs to finish glazing for the boutique hotel that's opened at the edge of the bay. You'll get it done, you always do. Lena stumbled on an errant tree root. I've stitched up a dozen kids after misadventures in the caves. I haven't even brought a cursory first aid kit with me. Bone density decreases at our age, you know. Their worries and chatter washed over me as I breathed out my anxiety into the salty air. Entering the network of winding caves was a risky business, but it could shed light on missing pieces of our history that had slipped out of reach when our family car crumpled around our parents. Even though Dad's expert tinkering had resulted in a purring engine when they set off on their trip. Kia pointed up at the silhouette of Merlin's tapered ears against the grassland. Have you noticed how the hair follows us everywhere? Lena sighed. Why didn't we just get a cat? At least they bury their doo-doo. He's an odd one, all right. I'd sleep with one eye open if I were you, Sitara. My prickles went up. You don't understand him yet, but you will. Merlin had started me on my journey of self-discovery. I'd fled in tears to the stormy beach the day of my work disciplinary, only to be interrupted by a talking hare. A hare who insisted I visit the pop-up library and refused to give up when I swatted him and fled in the opposite direction. It was Merlin who had revealed our witch ancestry to me. He had persevered through my disbelief, leading me through fear to wonder. It was almost as if Mum had sent us a guardian angel, although he smelt more of damp earth and muffled rear air ejections than heavenly roses. Not that my sisters had any inkling. They knew neither about magic nor the hidden kingdom of Jalapashu. I told them I'd found Merlin in an adoption ad in the local paper. They would have spat up their wine if I had introduced him as my witch's familiar. What is more, they had no idea that the caves were known to magical folk, not as the crypts, but as the Amber Hollows. My lies had grown day by day, stretching and deepening, taking on a life force of their own. I locked myself in my bedroom to study dusty textbooks, avoiding my sisters. Their troubled looks didn't go unnoticed, but there was no point having discussions when I was intent on clinging to my own path, when I had more clarity than ever before. I stripped myself of all the pretense and need and duty that the world places on women and decided to be bold, to be daring, to take what should have been ours. I regretted the lies, but if all went well in the Amber Hollows today, it would be worth it. Today could be the day we stepped into our true identities. I clenched my fists, willing it to be so. At the sight of the dark mouth of the cave, my breath caught in my throat. I picked my way across the last few meters of the trail, embedded rocks pressing into the rubber sole of my trainers, and waited for my sisters at the water's edge. My magic was a silent whisper through my bones. The slight flex of my fingers was all it took to disturb the water, sending deep ripples through its calm surface. There was something else too, a tug in the muscles of my heart, a quivering, as if my heart was a tuning fork, just as the catalogue of witchcraft had described. As if the most important organ in my body had become an antenna, a magnet that would only rest when I'd unearthed what lay within the Amber Hollows. My mouth twisted into a wry smile. I had always been so diligent at my job. Now here I was, my professional standing ruined, but magically able to find lost items. The universe always had the last laugh. Perhaps it had given me an exquisite gift. How long had I wondered what had really happened to Mum and Dad? Maybe this was what ancestral healing looked like. I flicked my gaze to Merlin. The hare's body language was alert, his nose lifted, tight limbs ready to spring. He watched over us from afar, as he'd promised he would, just in case my plan to distract the spy from Jalapashu unravelled and he cottoned on to us. Kia eyed the caves. With her long dark hair scraped into a ponytail, she looked younger than her years. What do you expect to find in there? Anticipation fizzed in my belly. A new beginning. You sound like a fortune cookie. Lena wrinkled her nose. It was dusted with summer freckles she'd inherited from our father. Come on then, let's get this over with. She took the lead, her golden hair tousled by the breeze, wild until we dipped into the gloomy caves where still air met jagged walls. The scent of salt water and damp earth seeped into my nostrils. As we walked further into the shadows, the sound of gently lapping waves faded away, replaced by the quiet drip of water and the occasional flutter of bat wings. Although we were alone, Kia whispered, "We should have brought a torch." The tug was stronger now, siphoning my focus from everything else. I pushed past Lena. I know where we're going. Kia spun towards me, her face tight. Tell us why we're here. You're hiding something. I pressed my hand to my chest, where my heart raced. Trust me, it's just a little further. Lena clocked my unease. Leave it, Kia, we're here now. Trust only goes so far, said Kia. What about talking things through? What about being able to rely on each other? Or recognizing that it's creepy as hell down here and an explanation would be nice? She sighed, softening. It can't be that bad, Sitara. It's not like you've brought us here to murder us. She expected me to laugh. Her eyes darkened with concern when my shoulders curled. A wave of cold came over me. This revelation couldn't be sugar-coated. It wasn't the sort of thing that could be packaged nicely to lessen the strangeness. The words fell like an axe between us. We are witches, just like our mother before us, I said. Lena cracked a smile. Pull the other one, you joker. But I wasn't a joker. Lena had a lightness of spirit that I could never emulate, and she knew it. The smile slowly slid off her face. Her slim brows arched as she checked Kia's reaction, like we were a shoal of fish that couldn't possibly move in different directions. God, I wanted my sisters with me on this one. Kia chose her words carefully. You've been under a lot of strain. My gaze flitted across their furrowed faces. It was no good. They would never listen without proof. Witches, magic, hair familiars. What I was asking them to believe was too far beyond the realms of possibility. I had no other choice. Heart pounding, I pivoted and pelted away from the dim light into the tunnels with all the grace of a flailing octopus on skates. Sitara, stop! My sisters cried out behind me, wondering out loud if I'd lost my mind, if I'd been drinking, if the rocky waters at work had pushed me over the edge, or if perimenopause had addled my brain. It didn't occur to them that maybe I just knew my own mind. Goosebumps chased up my skin. I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. The tug in my body propelled me forward, a need so fierce I bit back a cry. I slowed a little, panting, their footsteps and my own echoing through the labyrinthine innards of the amber hollows. Merlin had told me to trust my inner compass. He said I was like an old painted boat, beautiful underneath but in need of sanding to find its true beauty. But my doubts surged like the tide. Would the tug in my heart space deliver on its promise? Or would Lena's colleagues at the hospital declare me of unsound mind? A mad woman in the attic, a hysterical woman, a witch to be burnt at the stake. All those were phrases used for women deemed as unreliable. Or they had been through time. I hurled myself onwards, towards secrets wrapped in shadows, before my sisters reached me, before they took control for my own good. I had to prove to them what we were, what we had always been. The word reverberated in my mind. Witches. My eyes adjusted to the dark, enough for me to make out the contours of the cave walls. I counted 4 cave chambers and pushed on to the 5th. The scent of decaying vegetation overwhelmed me. A small crevice in the cave wall let in a sliver of light and a howl of wind. I shivered. A subterranean world my mother and maternal grandparents must have known. How old must Mum have been when she first set foot in this very same place? Was she in the first flushes of romance with Dad? Had she already given birth to me? Did she slip away from her childcare duties to be closer to the origins of Jalapashu? Kia and Lena's footsteps clattered towards me, seconds away now. The expansion in my chest told me I'd arrived where I was meant to be. Strangled light refracted in patterns across the walls of the fifth chamber. The chamber was full of amber deposits unseen by the naked eye. Some were small and scattered, forming clusters that glittered in the dim light. My witchcraft, the compass in my chest, spun and then locked onto its prize and settled. I sucked in lungfuls of thick, salty air, my eyes focusing. Stepping forward, I scratched at one spot within the musty walls until dirt caked my fingernails. My internal antennae couldn't have been wrong. The prize was there, I could sense it, only it was out of reach, deliberately so, to prevent greedy, ignorant or wicked people from unearthing it. It was meant for me, for my sisters, for our family. Sitara! The enclosed space amplified Kia's voice, disturbing a cluster of bats. Bats, a symbol of what lurked unseen. They took flight, a dance of darkness, rubbery wings slicing through the air, creating a rhythmic hum that made my sisters recoil and bought me precious seconds. I paused my desperate scrabble at the cave wall and reached for calm, though my nerves jangled. What was a spell Merlin had taught me? I had learned so much in a narrow window of time, poring over books and listening to his stories, that sometimes my knowledge pooled together, merging into an impenetrable ball of information that I struggled to make sense of. The elusive words of the spell tried to escape me, but I clawed them back. The caves would release what was ours. Triumph swelled in my chest as the Sanskrit words floated onto my tongue. Agacha, come. But the prize didn't want to come. It wanted to stay safely in the Amber Hollows. It wanted me to prove I had a claim to it, that we wouldn't misuse it. The very walls of the fifth chamber throbbed with reluctance. Merlin had told me that magic could be tricky. It took place at the juncture of intuition, intention, and talent. It required blood and grit. It almost always required a mentor. Magic was rarely linear. It was like pulling at the threads of a tapestry but not knowing which thread to pluck. It was an ebb and flow, like life itself, brimming with unexpected turns and uncharted territory. My stomach hardened. I had come so far, only to fail. Just as Kia and Lena braved their way past the cloud of bats and reached for me, another spell slipped into my head. A softer spell, a less demanding one, a coaxing. My lips parted and I spoke the words, Vapas ao, return to us. This spell wasn't about me. It wasn't selfish. It was a plea. It was about three sisters in the Amber Hollows, our mother before us, and the promise of what could be. My breath hitched, and my sister's grip on me eased as we gawped, awestruck. The rough cave walls juddered, and a large, oval stone came to the fore. It was a deep golden colour, reflecting the light like a star in the darkness, and when I extended my hand, it fell into my palm and fitted perfectly there, smooth to the touch and heavy. My body quivered as my skin met the cool stone, cells rippling in response. My eyes flashed wider as my meagre magic grew, and the sound of the distant waves echoed within me. The scent of the ocean permeated my nostrils, carrying with it memories of vast blue horizons. Lena stared at it. What the hell just happened? My legs wobbled as tears prickled behind my eyelids. The best archaeological dig of my life, that's what. Kia's hazel eyes filled with fierce love. I doubted you. I'm so... I shook my head, not wanting an apology, not when I'd hardly been a saint myself. A thrill went through me. My cells fizzed as if the amber stone had already amplified my magic. I wanted my sisters to feel the same thrill, but I needed their permission. I cut the jewel. We have magic here, Lena. We have dormant magic in us, and this stone is our ancestral right. If you touch it, you'll be changed by it. Kia cocked her head to one side. I want to believe you. The jewel exuded a joyful, invigorating energy. Then just choose to. It's time, Lena said. It's time to tell us everything. So we sat. We sat in our sundresses, our bottoms protesting against the compacted gravel and dirt floor. I cradled the jewel in my palm, circling my thumbs over its smooth surface, more whole than ever before. I unravelled our story in that sacred space, leaving no detail untold. Kamran, our maternal great-grandfather, was brought over from India to serve an influential English family during the British Raj. The family lived right here in Boundless Bay. Kamran served as their gardener. He missed home, but in time he found happiness. He made friends amongst the household staff and married one of the maids, Jyoti, our great-grandmother. My voice echoed in the amber hollows until its ancient walls hummed with the vibrations of our shared history. My sisters leaned forward as their curiosity about our past eclipsed their skepticism. Then one autumn night in 1905, the precise date is unclear, Kamran and Jyoti stumbled across this chamber with some of their friends. The bronze-hued stone brightened in my hand, urging me to unspool our family secrets. I don't know what forces conspired that night to make it possible, but they discovered a clutch of amber jewels. Those men and women, status symbols for a rich family, working as cooks, butlers, housekeepers, drivers and nannies, they found jewels that changed their destiny, jewels that made them more powerful than their employer. Wonder flitted across Kia's face. Did they sell them? Leave jobs and pursue their dreams? Did British society accept them? I shook my head. They had limited means to escape their contracts. Even if it had been possible, they couldn't just hop into another job. England was a less accepting place back then, but you see, the jewels were more than riches. I've been trying to piece it together. From the sparse entries in Jyoti's diary, the jewels caused a transformation in the 5 couples who held them that night. Some of the men became beasts, and then men again. One man found his head full of Sanskrit spells that made real the images he conjured up in his mind. One woman sang like a songbird and eased the bickering amongst the group. Kamran, the biggest-hearted of the men but weakest in stature, became the strongest. Jyoti herself, who couldn't swim, found she had water abilities. I really want to believe you. Kia cast a wary eye at the cloud of bats in one corner of the cave. Lena was a child of science, not story. It's riveting, but this is a fairy tale. It must be. Just listen to the end, okay? My stomach fluttered. Kamran, Jyoti and their friends gathered around a fire on the moonlit beach. They talked into the small hours, each family guarding their stone protectively. They made a secret pact to return to the Englishman's estate for one night to pack up their belongings and gather supplies. Kia frowned. They ran away. I nodded. They took a night train far away from Boundless Bay, taking only what they could carry. But they found that some amongst their party sickened, and all of them lost their new abilities. They spent a terrible night, cold and worried. Some thought they were being punished for their betrayal, so they decided to return to their master and beg forgiveness. They travelled back when the sun rose, and they found their strength and abilities returned the closer they got to Boundless Bay. Lena's voice was small, and I feared she would put two and two together and find answers I was still unravelling, like what had happened the night our parents died. Instead, she said, "They didn't try a hospital." They had no need to. Their health improved, and they realised that proximity to Boundless Bay was now essential. Jyoti's diaries talk about mourning the fact that they would never set foot on Indian soil again. They renewed their pact to create new lives away from the Englishman's estate, but close to the caves. But when they got off the train, their employer was waiting with a police sergeant. That's when the account gets unclear. Jyoti's writing states that the sergeant and his constables gave chase. Cameron didn't know his own strength. He and a friend commandeered their employer's car, knocking him unconscious. A police car was run off the cliff road. They didn't stop to help. They didn't stop until they passed our house and hit a dirt track. Kia and Lena held their breaths. The police investigation remained open for many years, but in the end it didn't matter. They didn't return to their employer's estate. They didn't spare him a thought. Off that beaten track, aided by their new magic, the runaway families founded a hidden kingdom called Jalapashu. The kingdom started as simple houses, but in time, as new generations were born, it grew larger. The runaway families took turns as rulers. Our maternal grandparents were born there and live there still. Mum was born there and lived there until she ran away to be with Dad. Kia gave an uneasy laugh. That's quite the story, right? Lena stood and dusted off her dress. Any grandparents worth their salt would have found us by now if they lived. Mum wouldn't lie about being an orphan. Kia rose to her feet with an apologetic glance at me and shuffled towards the next chamber. Let's go home. I've got some beautiful new mugs we can take for a test drive. I jutted out my chin. It was normal to gloss over magic when living an ordinary life. My sisters had heard me utter the spell. They had witnessed the jewel emerge from the slick cave walls, yet they refused to accept a different reality existed. Hadn't I done the same when Merlin had talked to me? Hadn't I preferred to believe someone had spiked my drink, or I was having a mental break rather than believe what was in front of me? That stubborn silken hair had wedged open the door to our past. My sisters could deny it all they wanted, but the fact remained, we were witches. My stomach somersaulted. I had to convince them. I hauled myself to my feet, taking care not to drop the jewel, ignoring the dull ache where my bottom had pressed against the jagged floor. If there was a piece of you missing, hidden from you, and you had the chance to know yourself better, would you take it, even if it was scary? Kia frowned. Of course. Lena grinned. Sneaky. You're making this a challenge. I met her gaze. 3 sisters, so different in style, taste and personality, but always able to pull together when it mattered. Hold the gemstone if you want to know yourselves better, if you want to discover yourself as witches. Lena huffed. Christ, okay, I'll do it, but you need to see us shrink. This is madness. I'll do it too, said Kia, because that was a cracking story, even if you needed elaborate props to tell it. We stood, 3 sisters in a circle, in the 5th chamber of the Amber Hollows. The caves where our ancestors had stood, where lives had changed in startling ways, and which awarded gifts that were a double-edged sword. But who could turn down such gifts? I didn't need to stop and think about it. New knowledge and skills were worth any price. The water drips echoed around us. Though my sisters didn't fully understand what would unfold, what already surged within my bones, their breathing grew thin in anticipation. Under the gaze of the watchful bats, in the flickering gloom, Kia and Lena reached out for the smooth amber stone. With a gasp and a tensing of their bodies, a surge of energy rushed through them. I stood transfixed, unsure of what would unfold, time skewed. What if my sisters didn't embrace the wildness of witchery as I had? What if they preferred pretend absolutes to lingering ambiguities? I welcomed the kaleidoscope of possibilities that magic offered, but their choice might not mirror mine. Just when I thought to wrench the jewel from their grasp and beg their forgiveness, their shock faded to awe, and with it the tightness in my chest. Lena studied her hands. A faint glimmer dusted them. Oh, there's a warmth in my fingers. It's as if I can sense the vitality of this place, even through the rock and the darkness. She spread her fingertips. A patch of springy moss grew until it entirely blanketed a nearby rock. The scent of flora intensified as if by her presence, and when she cupped her hands together, gentle energy radiated from her. Delicate vines unfurled from the cave ceiling, disturbing the bats, and filled her hands with blossoms. She laughed with delight. So, this is why I've always been able to rescue dying plants. Well, you two, prepare for gardens to bloom in unexpected places. I hugged her, breathless with excitement. I've wanted this for so long. I've wanted this for you both. Her gift suited her. Lena was vibrant and playful. A botanical witch had no room for seriousness alone. I turned to Kia, curiosity leaving my mouth like sandpaper. Our middle sister had planted her feet wide apart, as if grounding herself to the earth. Her breathing had deepened. She hadn't perceived Lena's gifts because she was too busy taking in her own. Her hazel eyes danced with the reflected glow of the amber gemstone. She knelt and placed a hand on the earth. I gasped when her touch awakened it and the earth rippled beneath our feet. The ground seemed to whisper to her, urging her to do more. Her expression filled with gentle resolve, and when she caressed it, it shuddered and stilled beneath her hands. Kia turned her shining face to me, calm despite the raw power she commanded. It's incredible. I sense the qualities of the earth, its nurturing qualities, but also the capacity for chaos. It's all balanced within me. I can tear through stone and soil and build it up, I think. It feels familiar, like I've encountered fragments of it before in my pottery practice. You have. The gemstone only amplifies what you can already do. I smooth my fingers over the jewel as if it were a talisman. I feel the elemental energy too. For me, it's synergy with water. Remember how Dad was astounded at my first swimming lesson? How he said I took to it like a duck to water? Inhaling deeply, I allowed myself at last to enjoy the amplification properties of the gemstone. Moisture from the air purled in droplets on my skin. My veins swam with the knowledge and an intuitive understanding of currents and tides. I couldn't give up magic. This experience was precious. The cost didn't matter. By the looks of it, my sisters were hooked too. Lena snaked a vine around her wrist like a bangle, then sent the plant upwards to form a laurel crown in her mussed hair. Kia bit her lip in concentration as her slightest touch made a rock rumble and crack clean lines down the middle. She fixed her eyes on me. We are witches. As in cauldrons, broomsticks, and covens? I nodded. As in spells and earth magic and potions, candles and intention. And yes, I guess we are a coven of our own. I'm going to need a bottle of wine tonight, preferably Merlot, all to myself, said Lena. Do you think I can grow my own vines and make my own wine? That's going to be really popular with the other nurses. I guess we'll find out. Watch this. My lips curved mischievously as I tuned into the whisper of hidden streams in the amber hollows. My sisters gave up the careful exploration of their gifts to peer at me. I waved my left hand, calling forth droplets of water from the thick air. A flowering of my fingers like ballet, and the glistening droplets danced in intricate patterns inches from our noses. I raised my arms, euphoria rising, and the droplets climbed higher before cascading in a light rain on our heads. Kia rubbed the moisture from her bare arms, laughing. Show off. Lena touched her skin too, marvelling, double-checking that the rain hadn't been a trick of the mind or linked to the geology of the cave, her mind stretching to encompass the possibility of magic. Sharing our gifts with each other wasn't extraordinary. It was utterly natural. It was play and wonder, as if somehow we had reverted to our childhood selves, showcasing our swimming strokes in the sea, deciding whose pot of cress had grown the fastest, or building sandcastles. When the siren of the hare's scream reached our sanctuary, my belly hardened to rock. I broke out in a sweat. How could I have been so carried away by our discoveries that I'd forgotten the threats that lurked? What utter carelessness! Merlin's wails, growing more insistent by the second, pushed me into action. Kia grimaced. What is that? It's too early for fox sex. There was only one reason why Merlin would make such a racket. The spy from Jalapashu must have returned. It didn't bear thinking about to be found here, to be discovered with the stone, to be hauled to Jalapashu to answer to the Raja. I had gleaned enough about the kingdom in Jyoti's diaries to understand why Mum had fled. I knew with searing clarity, while I wanted to learn about our heritage and claim our magic, Jalapashu wasn't part of the equation. We needed to stay the hell away from it. I sprang into action. Stashing the gemstone in my bra, I gripped my sisters. We have to go, now. Confusion marred Kia's face. I don't understand. What are you scared of? How could I tell them that the spy from Jalapashu would have a dagger sharper than a butcher's knife, that he wouldn't hesitate to spill our blood and toss us into the ocean if we could take the jewel? The jewel was the key to not only our future, but to knowing ourselves better. We couldn't let anything happen to it. Merlin was silent now, and my worry spiked, wondering what had befallen him. My voice reverberated in my head, desperate and fearful. I'll explain everything, but first we need to deal with someone out there. He wants to hurt us. Lena reached for her mobile phone. I'm calling the police. I lurched forward, and her phone clattered out of her hands. No police. They can't help with this. The last thing we need is for this to spiral out of control. You're scaring me, said Kia, as Lena swore and scrambled to retrieve her phone. My mind whirled through our options for escape. Kia could use her magic to bore a hole in the caves and allow us to slip away undetected, but her strength was unknown. What if she caused the structure to collapse? I shuddered. The only other way out of the amber hollows was to retrace our steps. I grabbed them by the wrists and hauled them after me, pushing forward through the slick darkness towards the yawning light where our enemy waited. In my mind's eye, I pictured him, tall and wiry, with a shaven head shaped like a bulb, sunken cheeks and booted feet even on the beach. Tourists often drifted to Boundless Bay, but those booted feet had made me suspicious. They had outed him as the spy from Jalapashu before Merlin confirmed my suspicions. Before I realised that wherever the man sat with his crumpled newspaper, he oriented himself towards the Amber Hollows. We ran through the network of caves, footsteps heavy against the rocky terrain, hearts racing. Kia and Lena caught my urgency, and I abandoned my grip on them, realising how we moved in unison, connected by an invisible thread of sisterly intuition, the bond that had seen us through countless tough moments prior to this. Although untested, we were powerful. Even now, my cells hummed with magic as if my body had its own internal song. The amber gemstone lay cool against my breast, urging calm and cunning. But I acted on instinct, not strategy, fear mingling with determination. The spy was only one man. I knew instinctively we should hide our magic from ordinary folk, but assailants were fair game. With scarcely a soul on the beach, we could fight. As we neared the mouth of the cave, where light met shadow, the spy stood there, just as Merlin's warning had foretold. We drew to a sudden halt, our breath coming in rasps, our sundresses soaked by sweat, dirt, and magical rain. He stood, impossibly tall, spidery even. He was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, I suppose to blend into his surroundings in the bay, where the folk lounged on the beach in deck chairs or on picnic blankets, ate fish and chips, or stripped down to their swim shorts to try bodyboarding in the bracing English waters. He was booted and grinning, having cornered Hunza Marlini's 3 daughters. Hunza Marlini, our mother, who had escaped from Jalapashu and never wanted to go back, who had given up magic and embraced an ordinary life and had shrouded our past and possibilities from us. But I had made a mistake. He wasn't alone. The spy stood to the far left of a troop of men, his job done. The men accompanying him were dressed in military attire. Their brown skin marked them out as different in coastal England, where even our mixed heritage provoked curious looks. They blocked our path, a wall of menace and smirking guile, as if they had already won. They wore smart jackets threaded with gold over broad shoulders and trousers ironed to a crease over muscular thighs. Daggers and swords hung from belts looped around their waists. I froze, my mind in disarray, almost tempted to walk past them as if we were just everyday women on a day at the beach. As if the tightness in my throat was nothing more than the sense women get when overbearing men stand in their way, and all we had to do was shove past and roll our eyes about it at home. The waves called to me, and I didn't listen. If only we could disguise ourselves. If only we could escape unnoticed. Merlin had taught me a spell he used, a spell that was unpredictable and some might say unwise because it could hold for a few moments or a few minutes, but rarely as long as you needed it to. A spell that changed the perception of onlookers, but only if the witch or wizard held their focus and only if the onlooker didn't look too hard. A spell that was, therefore, almost entirely useless. Lena lifted an eyebrow. "What is this? Are you boys into military cosplay?" Heart ricocheting in my chest, I scanned the hilltops and shoreline for Merlin. The hare was nowhere to be seen. I hoped with fervour that he was safe, that he had hidden after raising the alarm. One man stepped forward from the group of 5, his eyes dangerously dark beneath the lock of mussed hair that curled at his forehead. His clothing was more elaborate than the rest, marking him as their leader. He studied us in turn, lingering a moment on Kia, his cheeks flushing dark. When he addressed me, his accent didn't stem from the bay. with elongated vowels, a rolled R, and a rhythmic quality to his speech that seemed almost poetic despite the daggers at his waist. Sitara Marlowe, in the flesh. My heartbeat drummed in my throat. How do you know me? His face hardened, and a shiver darted up my spine. My men have been watching you ever since you checked out books from the pop-up library in the bay. Kia elbowed me. We don't have to talk to them. Come on, let's go. The man's chiseled face softened into a smile that I didn't trust one bit. I just want to talk. I summoned my dignity despite our dishevelled state as our gazes locked. Didn't you ever learn that it's rude, no, criminal, to stalk women? He moved his hand to rest lightly on his dagger. The air between us bristled with intent, but when he spoke, he broke the tension with a sensual smile. Let's take this down a notch. I'll introduce myself. I'm General Kumar, and I speak for the Raja of Jalapashu. You have something that belongs to us. He was a beautiful man, but there was a stealth and a precision in his movements that made my hands grow clammy. Like he had the instincts of a jungle cat, and his claws were one misstep away. Merlin had warned me. He had warned me not to push so hard or act so fast. He'd warned me that the kingdom would act fiercely in its defence, that there would be daggers and swords and teeth and claws. I lifted my chin, blocking out my sister's puzzled looks. I don't give a damn who you are. I have nothing of yours. You lie. Magic can only be hidden from ordinary men. Don't make the mistake of thinking I am ordinary. The unnatural waves behind me are your doing. The jewel you found belongs to Jalapashu. The general's lips pressed flat together. Hand it to me. I don't want to hurt you. My muscles tightened in readiness. What makes you think you can? A storm darkened his face, although the day was still bright. Be careful before you choose this path. Kia and Lena jerked their heads towards me, but I was already in full flow. The power of the ocean coursed through my veins. The spy scurried away. In my peripheral vision I glimpsed how Kia, with an effortless flick of her hands, captured the spy's feet in the earth, and how Lena's palms released a thick vine that curled and tightened around his wrists. But I had other matters to focus on. I raised my hands to call a swirling vortex from the shoreline as the general and his soldiers advanced. They drew their daggers, but without pausing for thought, I pushed the water towards them in torrential surges and snaking tendrils that caused them to lose their footing and their weapons. Though they came at me from different directions, I found water could be a broad instrument of damage, hurling the troops backwards and cascading them across the shoreline. I could also target my magic more specifically, plucking a dagger from their grip with a flick of my wrist. The general shouted commands, and the men attempted to predict my movements. But water is unpredictable and fluid by nature, and anger bolstered my courage. Our assailants sprawled, limbs entangled as if ensnared by invisible bonds, their faces wrapped in surprise. I enjoyed my assault. The cool droplets cascading through my fingers, the delicate spray of liquid against my skin, the rhythm of the ocean in tune with my breathing, and the salty breeze brushing against my face. I thought of all the times when I had bitten my tongue for fear of being misunderstood or fear of retaliation, and revelled in the sheer, unapologetic, intoxicating, liberating power that burst forth from me there in Boundless Bay, where I had been a little girl and now was a woman fully alive to my potential. My sisters joined in the chaos. Lena sent out sweeping vines that snatched at the men's torsos and snaked around their limbs, tumbling them into the surf, and Kia was a marvel to behold. I studied textbooks, but here she was commanding, though her magic had only just bloomed. An instinctive witch. She created sandmen that chased the soldiers on the outer edges into the depths of the cave, collapsing entire cave walls around them in a way that made me sick to my stomach. Chunks of stone and flares of dust and sun on the sand where there had only been shadow. But my sister wasn't a murderer. She fought to protect us, not to kill them. She built up the cave walls again, her dark hair wild about her head, reconstituting the landscape just as it had been. At her command, the stone crumbled, the earth softened, and the soldiers studied their scrapes and bruises and counted themselves lucky. They quaked in fear, though they were free. Glee bubbled up in my chest despite the danger. We were a coven. The jewel tucked into my bra kept my magic sparking, though my sister's magic dwindled. I didn't yet know how to control my gifts. I operated on pure luck, like a chancer who chooses to fight instead of flee, but has no real training. I toiled on, unskilled but determined. These men from Jalapashu had underestimated me. They had come to our home expecting to crush us, and had instead found resistance. They could lap it up. If they hurt my sisters, they could drown, for all I cared. How much time passed? Minutes? An hour, engaged in battle at the mouth of the cave? Each moment bled into the next. The ocean filled my mind, drowning out the men's shouts and my sister's warnings. It was easy to get lost in the rolling waves, sharp seagull cries, the raging surf and whispers of shells. I forced myself to tune in to my sister's pleas. Lena was pale with fright. "You're weakening." Only then did I notice my energy waning and the fatigue in my bones. My magic grew less precise, and a burly soldier gained enough ground to almost grab the thick mop of my hair before I thrust him aside. The currents responded to my commands less readily, becoming fragmented. The whispers of the ocean became fainter. I cast a look at my sisters, desperate to protect them, but aware that I didn't have endless reserves of magic. I could knock the soldiers down like bowling pins, but they would only get back up. "Give it to me," said Kia. "Give me the jewel." I recoiled. She had proven her strength, but I didn't want to hand it over. I'd been Kia and Lena's fortress since our parents' death. I had shielded them. Protecting my sisters was central to my identity. It was stupid to hesitate. In that moment of wavering, the general pounced forward from amongst floundering men soaked to their skin, swooping first to retrieve 2 bejeweled daggers from the foam. With alarming speed, he closed the distance between us, power rolling in waves off his lithe body, coal-black eyes narrowed in determination. Kia called the earth to trap him, but too much time had passed since she'd held the jewel. Her magic was meagre, a splurge of sand, nothing more. Lena made an attempt too. No cactus jail or serpent vines, but a spray of flowers sprung up around him. I flung up my hands, calling the deep blue, and flinched as my magic failed to stop him. Once, twice, only failure. To my surprise, the general slipped the daggers into his damp belt. A silvery scar through his eyebrow glinted in the afternoon light as he bore down on me. He spoke softly but with spine-tingling intent. His eyes flicked to my sisters as he clamped my wrist. "I won't ask again. Give me the jewel and walk away unharmed. There are others in Jalapashu who wouldn't show such generosity." Bitterness swelled in my chest. "Fine." He let me go, and I flushed as I reached into my bra to rip the jewel from where it seemed to have burrowed inside me. A forlorn feeling mushroomed in me as I looped it through the air to the waiting hands of Kia. My artistic sister, who had terrible ball skills, caught the incoming missile as if they belonged together, opposing magnets. Then she slipped the honey-hued gemstone into her lacy black bra. At her glance, I tumbled away from the general and towards my sisters. With a swift motion, Kia knelt and drove her hands into the damp sand. Her emerald sundress fluttered in the wind. Her hazel eyes shone with joy as she channeled her magic into the core of the earth. The ground beneath us shook as ripples formed in the sand, even as the soldiers advanced. Their feet sank into the shifting sands. Their gait impeded, any movement impossible. Panic flashed across their faces as the earth tightened its embrace. With a wave of her hand, as I looked on with awe and pride, Kia summoned a vortex of sand and sediment to encircle the general, his soldiers, and the spy, not killing them, but rather blocking their view of us and holding them in monuments of their stupidity. She buried their ambitions, but not their lives, under the earth. Lena stared. That was incredible. I'm going to relive that for days in my head. I mean, Stallone and Schwarzenegger have nothing on you two. Why did I end up with the flower power? Kia's face crumpled. What have I done? I cupped her cheek, my voice quiet. Saved us. A whisper. I can't leave them like that. Sure you can, Lena called out, and, emboldened by their imprisonment, she added, dicks. Anxiety gnawed at me. Your magic is unlikely to hold. They'll be fine. We have to get away. I retrieved and secured the jewel, held up my finger to my lips, and motioned them to take off their trainers. Ignoring their protests, I urged them towards the ocean. Hiking back home would take far too long. It was impossible to judge how long it would take before the soldiers broke free of the sediment. But having grown up at the beach, all three of us were strong swimmers. Swimming away from the hollows was dangerous, and the ocean was interspersed with rocks and churning currents. But I could alleviate the risks with my newfound magic. We swam. We sliced through the water, my magic imbuing us with cleaner strokes than ever before. 50 meters into the swim around the cove, our front crawl changed to breaststroke. Kia gasped. About time. It's been a hot minute since I was on the swim team. Lena had found an easy rhythm. Can't have our mascara running, can we? Her teasing tone masked the seriousness in her brown eyes. You're going to explain everything at home without missing a thing. It was a demand, not a question. Of course. I'd say anything she wanted to hear to keep us moving away from danger. I glanced back periodically to ensure our assailants remained securely trapped. We reached the shoreline and dragged ourselves out of the lapping blue water onto the empty beach with a mixture of exhaustion and elation. Our breath came in pants as we wrung out our sundresses. Overhead, seagulls circled and a bank of clouds drifted as if it was an ordinary day, as if our whole world hadn't changed. Somehow, the everyday sounds and sights of our childhood beach calmed the drumbeat of my heart. I slumped with relief as Merlin bounded to our side, and I buried my face in his tan and black fur. He smelt of wildflower meadows and damp air. Without your warning, we would have been cornered. His tapered ears lay flat against his skull. I was scared you wouldn't hear me. He turned his attention to my sisters, who approached us with gaping mouths and tentative steps. Lena slumped, emotional and physical energy spent. It's all too much. The hare just spoke in a voice that reminds me of sleepy giants and woodland glens full of fairy circles. Merlin quivered. and stretched out his body to train his liquid gold eyes on the horizon. They are coming. My breath quickened. It was true. The soldiers propelled themselves through the crashing waves, grave intent etched on their faces. Turbulent waves impeded their progress, but they didn't yield. They inched forward through the unforgiving waves. My thoughts spun sickeningly like a waltzer at a fairground. Spies from Jalapashu hadn't yet found our house, but it was only a matter of time. If we ran across the beach, it would hasten that day. Even if we could muster the energy to fend off another attack, I couldn't fathom using magic in Boundless Bay. I didn't want our neighbours to fear us. Neither could I give up the jewel. We had to shake them off on the beach. Merlin spun to me, his powerful hind legs taut and ready to spring. We must run. We should rewind this whole day. Kia's voice shook. I don't want to be any part of it. Quiet expanded in my chest as their voices flowed over me. Take off your sundresses. Lena groaned. Pardon me? I'm wearing tiny wet underwear and I have a bush that belongs in a garden centre. I'd rather take my chances with the daggers. Strip. Down to your underwear. Humiliation didn't matter a jot if we managed to survive. I tore at my clothes, ripping the whimsical pearly moon buttons off my dress in haste. Once my sisters were done, I buried the sodden masses in the sand with clumsy hands. By now the men were less than 20 metres from the shoreline. I prayed that salt water sprayed their eyes and blurred their vision. With any luck, they were too caught up in the symphony of the ocean, the swell and plunge of the waves, to catch on to my plan. My underwear was nude and frayed, nuder still in its damp state. Lena wore an unmatched set with polka dot knickers and a retro bra in a retro rainbow fabric. Kia fared best in her lacy black briefs and bra combination. Her areolas were hidden at least, unlike mine. We all sprouted hair in the usual places, the sorts of places society encouraged women to keep smooth. Gritting my teeth, I turned to Merlin. The disguise spell. I need it. The hare grunted. It's unreliable. The noise in my head built into a scream. Soldiers in the surf 10 metres away now. It's now or never. Merlin's golden eyes darkened. The spell you want is Parivartanam Niyatam. It means change is inevitable. Use it carefully, Sitara. Remember my stories. He raced away to hide amongst the dunes. I rounded on my sisters with a hiss, urgency making my legs quiver. Sit. They sank to the ground with me, cowering, mistrustful even of me, and I rued sharing my secret, rued even giving them access to the deep folds of their magic when it had turned out this way, when I had brought them more danger than joy, when there had been no time to prepare them or tease out what they really wanted, when I should have waited until I could present our history and their magic tied up with a ribbon without all the ramifications that had unspooled today. Trust me, I said, even though I knew that panic was certain. Trust me to speak this spell to protect us. And I spoke it. I said the Sanskrit words, Parivartanam Niyatam, and the spell rolled off my tongue like a cannon. It took the careful image I had sculpted in my mind. It took the intent in my heart, and in the blink of an eye, and as grey clouds rolled across the afternoon sky, the spell changed us. We were no longer women in our 40s. We became wise crones in our 70s, with our bodies aged upwards. My sisters were recognisable still, although their hair was now silver and their eyes hooded, and their skin pleated with wrinkles where only seconds ago faint laughter lines had been. We huddled together on the sands, our sundresses buried beneath a mound, staring at our crooked hands with their paper-thin skin, noticing how the bras weren't quite so full, nor our backs as straight. How maybe sitting on the sand might have been foolish, and we might have difficulty getting up. We stared at each other wordlessly, drinking in the taste of how it would be in the future, 3 sisters in their 70s, still having adventures together, and all the insecurities of youth faded away. Suddenly, age wasn't to be feared. It was a blessing. And in my chest, contentment bloomed for this moment of togetherness. And though the men arrived at the shore, a calmness settled over me, a wisdom that came with age and experience. This too would pass. We could handle anything that came our way. When the soldiers dragged themselves out of the ocean, only the general spared us a glance, as if old women were invisible. More fool them. He didn't discern the jewel still hidden in my bra. His group stopped mere yards away by an abandoned sandcastle. Our ears pricked, and my heart continued its rhythmic rat-tat-tat. The general frowned and sighed at his dripping wet uniform. Prem won't be pleased. No, said his thick-set deputy. The mission was a failure. The general raked a hand through the inky curl of his salt spray hair. We know now that the Amber Hollows have released another gemstone. That's not failure, it's hope. We know that outsiders have access to our deep stores of magic. That is something the Raja will want to know. We will go home. The moustached deputy tossed seaweed from his uniform. There you will tell Prem Kumar that today's failings happened under your leadership. The general's smile was cold. You have his ear. Tell him what you want. They strode across the beach and were gone before the spell wore off, before our bodies returned to normal, becoming stronger and straighter and smoother, the hard-won wisdom chiselled away until doubts resurfaced. Doubts that nagged at me. I'd been careless. I'd compromised my sister's safety. I shouldn't have put the gemstone above all else, even though it was the key to locking our past. We sat there, the salty tang of the ocean mingling with a crisp breeze that sent goosebumps racing up our scantily clad bodies. What you did today was reckless, said Kia. And exhilarating, said Lena. Kia hooked her arm through mine. Once we're home and dry and have had something to eat, we'll talk. I'm ravenous after that swim. And that magic. She shook her head, marvelling as the tide drew closer. Yeah, I said, although the synapses in my brain already fizzed with how to make good of the situation. How to spool the secrets back and make everything all right again. I'd been selfish to unburden myself. I wanted to protect Kia and Lena just as I always had. Our run-in with the soldiers from Jalapashu couldn't happen again. Lena pulled a ragged trio of sundresses from the sand, her face contorting. Not sure these are wearable anymore. Kia winced. If we walk around the bay in this state of undress, the old biddies will have a field day. Lena giggled. Forget the old biddies. Tommy still carries a light for you. If he sees you like that, he'll think he's died and gone to heaven. Kia lunged for the sundress. Give me that. At least get some fish and chips out of him first. Go on, I dare you. What do you think, Sitara? She should shimmy her rack at Tommy, right? She'd get 3 portions of cod and chips out of that, and he'd probably throw in mushy peas and a mountain of ketchup sachets too. Kia snorted. I'd rather do the walk of shame straight home than mess with Tommy's heart, love him. As my sisters fretted about small-town tittle-tattle gossip and the trainers we'd left behind, I whispered another spell, a quiet spell, one of a handful of spells I had learned during countless nights holed up in my bedroom, studying texts from the pop-up library. A spell that made specific memories fade into the recesses of the mind and enabled me to pluck their memories of magic and our family history straight from their brains. Vismar. The spell felt dirty on my tongue, but it was necessary. My sisters paused their conversation, momentarily stunned, then continued their chatter. The hare bounded up to me from the dunes, his nose twitching, sensing the wisps of my spells that thickened the salt air. "What have you done?" My spine bowed. At my chest, the gemstone seared my skin. "What I had to. I'm sorry." I leaned my chest against his, sorrow making my movements leaden. Then I whispered a second spell, so he couldn't betray me. Samanyam Pavaya. So he couldn't tell my sisters about my lies, the lies that would keep them safe. The hare's molten gold eyes widened in horror. I leaned my cheek against his silken head in apology, but Merlin's body stiffened. He turned his back on me and tried to speak to my sisters, but the noises he emitted were no longer words, not to them. Instead, they were a series of grunts that made Kia and Lena chuckle. "He's a sweet thing, really," said Lena. "I don't know why it took so long for him to grow on me." Kia caressed his soft ears. "He has a knowing look about him, like he's got a vault of secrets inside of him." She stood up, patted the sand off her thighs, and tucked the hair under her arm. "Well, that was a lovely day at the beach. Next time we fancy a swim, we should bring our swimming costumes. Time for the walk of shame. God." Just another memory. Lena reached down to haul me up. Guilt was a stone in my chest, making it hard for me to breathe. Turning away for a moment, I adjusted the jewel, pushing it lower so it nestled between the wire in my bra and my underboob. It wouldn't do for my sisters to catch sight of it. Ignoring Merlin's wounded looks, I walked home with Kia and Lena in bare feet and soaked underwear to honking cars and hollering lads. I'd find a way for us all to access our history without consequences. Until then, magic would be just a fairy tale to Kia and Lena. The Jalapashu spies would return to find us. Of that there was no doubt. Urgency coiled in my body, and the weight of being firstborn pressed down on me. My sisters deserved the truth, however unpalatable. I'd work all hours to uncover a way to claim our magic, but avoid Jalapashu's tentacles. A pulse of my fingers, and droplets squeezed from the wet mass of my dark hair and tracked in patterns down my back. I longed for the ocean to wash away my lies. Hadn't Kia wanted to rewind the day? I was only doing as she asked. But my lies clung to me, saturating every layer of my being. Time would tell if I'd made the right choice by shielding my sisters. Uncertainty dampened my spirits, but I took solace in one thing. I'd made my decision with love. Thank you for listening to Become a Witch, prequel short story to the Majestic Midlife Witch series, written and performed by NZ Nasser.